PowerPoint point by point basis on the techniques and different eye shapes and things like that, since I have my own eye shape and everyone's eye shape is going to be a little bit different. So I can demonstrate the different techniques on myself, but for the full impact, I am a visual person, so I wanted to add a whole bunch of different pictures. So bear with me while I switch to my desktop. I only have one monitor though, so if you ask questions, I probably won't be able to see it until I switch back to my camera mode. Just FYI. Is everyone able to hear me okay? Perfect. All right, so I created this PowerPoint for everybody just to make it a little bit easier. So today we're going to be talking about eyeshadow fundamentals. A lot of people tend to find eyeshadow pretty intimidating, but honestly, it's really, really simple once you kind of figure out the patterns on which you need to do things, and then from there you can easily build onto it. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using photos that I've done on my own makeup clients and models, and then I also have a couple of images that I've just pulled up from Google, so credit to any of those producers of that content. I've just taken little screenshots. This is just for private nonprofit demonstration uses, so it's not like I'm going to be getting out of that. So just FYI. So a lot of the reasons people use eyeshadow specifically is because if you just do your whole face, kind of like I've done just my eyebrows today, and then a little bit of like a lip gloss. I haven't done my skin yet. But my eyes look really kind of mid, just kind of nothing is really enhancing them. My eyelashes are naturally kind of more blonde, so there's no definition to this eye space. Personally, I have more wide set eyes. So normally, like if you are an art student, for example, you know the 5 eyes rule. So normally the distance between here to here is an eye, an eye, an eye, an eye, and then an eye. But obviously that's not even technically universal. Some people are going to have eyes that are a little bit more spaced out this way or a little bit closer together, kind of like a character creator in like a video game. You can kind of move that around a little bit, but what you have, you're kind of stuck with. But there are different ways to modify it. You can play it up. So my eyes being wider apart, I could play that up and make them seem even more wide. You'll see some actresses with really big eyes do that to give them more of like an ethereal, kind of otherworldly kind of effect. Other people might want to correct that and make the things on the face, all the different facial features seem more symmetrical. So they might do eyeshadow in a way to bring their eyes closer together to create a little bit more symmetry, make the nose seem a little bit more narrow, for example. So primary reasons people are going to be using eyeshadow is to either enhance your eye shape, to balance your eye shape and complement the whole face, to give the appearance of being more alert and engaging, especially like today, for example, I'm quite tired. I have some bags under my eyes. If I do something with eyeshadow, that's going to help detract from that, take the attention away from those areas and make it a lot more interesting to look at me. My eyes are going to seem a little bit more sparkly, more interesting. Eyes are the windows to the soul. They're the first thing people are going to notice about you more than pretty much anything else, according to a bunch of different studies. So eyes, out of everything you're going to do makeup wise, I would say eyes are actually probably going to be at the top of the list. Another way you can use eyeshadow is to artificially elongate, exaggerate, round out, lift, sharpen, or soften your facial features. And ultimately, one of the most fulfilling ways to use eyeshadow is just to create your own aesthetic. Personally, I am more on the alternative side of the spectrum. So I tend to do things a little bit more dramatically, which fortunately does work out a little bit in this presentation to make things a little bit more noticeable. But obviously, if you're just starting out or if you're a beginner, start out with really easy to use colors like medium brown tones or taupe tones that are going to be a little bit softer, a little bit more natural. It's a lot easier to make mistakes and then they aren't actually really that noticeable. So that's definitely a pro tip for you right there as well when you're starting out. There's a couple different types of eyeshadows as well. Powder is my favorite. It's definitely more beginner friendly. If you make a mess, it's really easy to clean up. You don't have to worry about any specific drying times or anything like that. It's really easy to use with brushes and other tools. Depending on the eyeshadow brand or the different techniques you use to apply the eyeshadow, you can have different coverages from sheer to full coverage, meaning from almost translucent to very opaque. It's also probably the easiest to blend simply because you don't have to worry about a drying time. You can keep going back in and editing it even after you've done your whole face, for example, and still smoke things out or blend things out a little bit more if you wanted to. Also, eyeshadow products can last up to 2 years if they are a powder formula, for example. They can technically last longer than that, but at that point, you're risking hygienic compromise. So as long as you know how to use like a spray bottle of alcohol on your eyeshadow palettes to disinfect them or remove any kind of like fungal growth or anything like that. Still, I technically 2 years is about the cutoff limit for most eyeshadow palettes. A big detriment, though, to this formulation of eyeshadow, though, is the fact that you tend to get a little bit of fallout. So, by fallout, I mean the powder itself sprinkling onto the cheek a little bit. Now, a way to kind of circumvent that, that I have done in all of my previous lessons on here, is I always, always, always recommend beginners start with their eyebrows and then the eye area before doing their complexion and lips and setting their face and everything else. Because if you have fallout, it makes it super easy to wipe away. Or if you make a mistake when you're doing your eyeshadow, like you made it go a little bit too far or it looks a little muddy, it's really easy to clean it up and restart it without having to take like your whole face and restart. So I highly recommend, especially if you're a beginner, actually starting out by doing your eye area first for this reason. There are also cream formulations. So those ones are going to be a little bit trickier, especially if you're a beginner, though. They're going to be very strongly pigmented. They are easy to blend with your fingers or a brush, and they do have the added benefit of not having any fallout, which means none of it's going to end up dropping off of your eyes or flaking off of your eyes onto your cheek. However, once it actually sets, so once the moisture absorbs into your skin and leaves the dry part on the top layer, it's really difficult to blend it out afterwards, which is a good thing if you know what you're doing and you've already blended it the way you want to. That means it's going to stay there and it's not going to budge, which is a huge plus. But if you messed up, then that might be an issue. Another detriment to cream eyeshadows, though, is that they do dry out over time. And because bacteria and mold like wet places, the fact that it does have a moisture content to it compared to a powder, it does make it less hygienic over time. Definitely want to use this as solo use or be using tools that you clean in between if you're using it with other people, like if you're a makeup artist like myself, for example. A lot of the cream pros and cons are going to be very similar to the liquid pros and cons here. However, I will say that pure liquid formulations can actually be pretty beginner friendly sometimes, especially if it's like a lightweight formula that blends out really easily. But generally, it tends to be suited for those who have mastered the technique, especially if it's a really in your face kind of color, for example. I do find them really nice for doing like a cut crease though, because you are using a liquid and you can be very precise with it as well. Another cool thing is that with liquid formulations, sometimes they can be glossy or hydrating as well, which is really nice if you have like drier eyes and you want a little bit of extra hydration. They do have a great longevity once they dry down, and you can actually use them as a substitute for eyeshadow primer and build off of that base if you want to as well. A con, again, very similar to the cream in that it tends to dry quickly and be difficult to blend once it is finally set. Again, with the same drying out over time means it doesn't have as much viability in use the same way that powder does. That being said, eyeshadow palettes tend to actually come and make your life a little bit easier by having usually at least 4 shades a couple different tones, and they're already pre-selected or pre-planned by whoever developed the eyeshadow palette to complement one another. Now, typically, eyeshadow colors are going to fall into 4 different categories. The first one is going to be your base. That's typically the lightest shade, the one closest to your skin tone. Sometimes they're peachy or sometimes a little bit more neutral. They can create a smooth canvas, kind of like when you prep a canvas for art, where you do one solid swath of color, and then from there, you build colors on top of it. Then the transition shade, that's going to be a slightly deeper shade than the base, and that's going to add dimension and a little bit of an in-between shade between your darkest and your lighter shade, to where it's not super harsh and it doesn't get as muddy. So typically those are added around the crease area or along the lash line or lid to kind of create that color variation. After you've used your transition, typically you'll have a deepening shade. It's usually the darkest color in the eyeshadow palette, or maybe if it's a bigger eyeshadow palette, you'll have a couple different variations of it. Typically, you're going to add those to the lash line, the crease, and the outer corner of the eye. These are all terms that I'll get to as well once we talk about the anatomy of the eye. And then you have a highlighter shade that's typically going to be the brightest shade, matte or shimmery. Matte meaning that it doesn't have any glitter or extra dimension to it. It is a flat color that is just brighter. Shimmery, obviously, that just means it's a little bit glittery. It's going to have a little bit of a glow to it. Now this you're going to add to the area usually below the base of the tail of your eyebrow bone, typically around the tear duct area or even on the lid, especially in the center of the lid, to give you a really cool dimension. Let me switch over real fast so I can show you some examples. Sorry, I have to manually go in because OBS through Discord, it needs like a little bit of a middleman, so I can't just hit a hotkey and it switches, unfortunately. So here's an example of a nice eyeshadow palette. You're going to have a couple different tones here. So any of these shimmer shades are typically going to be highlighting shades. Any of these more neutral colors are going to be more like your base. These ones are going to be really pretty kind of transition colors. And then these darker colors right here and here, you can use as more of like the deepening kind of shade. A lot of eyeshadow palettes, like regardless of what their color tones are going to have this kind of set. So base color or highlighting color, different transition colors, darker color, and then you have these 2 shimmery colors, which you can actually use on the lid, just kind of give it a little bit more of an oomph to, I guess you could almost call it like a transition if you were to put it in one of those categories. Then we have liquid eyeshadows. These usually come with a little bit of an applicator to them. You just push it in, and then you can use a brush or your fingers to blend it out. And notice how it has a nice, healthy bit of a sheen to it. And now that it's dried down, I can't really move it around anymore. If you wanted to, though, this is actually a really good way to use a liquid eyeshadow as like a base. And then you can use it to kind of build the deeper layers on top of it, your transition color and your darker color on top of it. And that way you kind of have a little extra security blanket to where it doesn't move around. I'm going to switch back to my presentation real fast. Oh, also real fast. This one, if I wanted to, you could actually use liquid over liquid sometimes. So that way it has a little bit of this sparkly element to it. However, depending on the formulation, it could actually, let me show you. It could actually pull up the color you put underneath it. So that's another drawback of using liquid with liquid, for example, which is why I tend to use liquid as a base first and then do powder over it typically. Sorry, my computer is a little bit laggy today. So now that you know the different formulations and the reasons for wearing eyeshadow, one of the biggest, most important things is going to be color theory. A lot of times when you have pre-made eyeshadow palettes, they actually take a lot of the guesswork out of it for you because they have colors that go together with one another. Now, that's not always the case, especially when you have enormous eyeshadow palettes, but typically they'll be selected in order to complement one another. So when you're a beginner though, I do recommend when you're first starting out to stick to colors that are of the same color family. So for example, using different intensities of warm brown. Again, a lot of eyeshadow palettes have the colors already selected to complement one another. Going back to my foundation video where I talked about finding your undertone, that's also important, not just for foundation, but also for using eyeshadow. So when you have a cool undertone, cooler toned eyeshadows are going to look more natural on you. Same for neutral with neutral and warm with warm. That isn't to say that you have to use only those color schemes. Obviously, being alternative, I switch it up all the time. But when you're first starting out as a beginner, when you're first starting to learn the ropes, typically you want to just stay with what works for you. Cooler tones, again, tending to be on the more blue side of the spectrum, warm tones being more on the reddish orange side of the spectrum, and neutral kind of falling in between. Sometimes they can be more of like taupe colored eyeshadows, or sometimes even a little bit more of a peachy color, kind of in between like a purple and an orange. I'm sure you probably are familiar with using the color wheel to complement your eye colors. So for green eyes, for example, green is on this side of the color wheel. The complementary color of green is going to be on the opposite side over here. So you're going to have purples and oranges and red, burgundy kind of colors. When you put these two colors side by side or next to one another, they intensify one another. The color is going to pop even more. So if you have hazel eyes and you wear purple or like a burgundy orangey kind of colored eyeshadow, your eyes are suddenly going to tend looking a little bit more green instead of hazel. Now, if you were to do green eyeshadow with green eyes, ironically enough, they wouldn't emphasize one another. It would actually, the intensity of the green on the eyeshadow might actually make your green eyes appear more brown. So complementary colors, aka colors on the opposite side of the color wheel from one another, are going to be the ones that intensify a little bit better. So if you have blue eyes, for example, using these orangey or yellow tones, more like warm brown tones, your eyes are going to pop a lot more. They're going to be more noticeable. They're going to have a sparkle to them, and they're going to seem brighter. Now, you also have brown eyes. So brown eyes, typically, you can get away with, honestly, the same technique for green eyes and blue eyes on brown eyes. Brown eyes are very versatile. You can pretty much do any color combination, and they're going to look great. Although I do tend to stick more towards warmer color tones, except for sometimes purples. In this diagram that I found, you have a couple of easy shortcuts kind of putting it there for you. Now, another thing that's very interesting about color theory is, let's say you've mastered doing a purple smoky eye on yourself or a brown smoky eye on yourself, and you want to change and get out of your comfort zone and do a colorful look. A lot of times, if you were to do like, oh, well, I want to do a, purple or blue and yellow or orange eyeshadow look, because they do intensify one another, it can be a little bit challenging because once you actually blend those two colors together, it's going to turn muddy. It's going to look like a bruise. It's going to look not very nice. So a way to avoid that happening is instead of blending the blue into the yellow outright and creating a kind of like green tone, which is going to give you more of that bruise effect, try mixing it with the color adjacent to whatever is across from it. So if I used a blue base color and I did a transition into one of these more warm tones and then to that yellow tone, having a transition shade in between those two colors is going to help it come off a lot less muddy, and your color is going to be more true to themselves. So here's a picture of my eye from like a decade ago. Ignore the brows, please. I was wearing a hat or something and it just destroyed my eyebrow. But you can see how I'm blending the blue into the yellow by using those adjacent colors. So like that pinkish or orangish tone in between to where it doesn't turn into a grungy, bruised, gray, green color. So by adding a color in between, again, look how little I'm actually applying here. It goes straight from blue to that peachy orange tone, and then the orange is blended into the yellow. And then underneath, I've added a tiny bit of green in between the blue to transition it into the yellow. And then, because I don't want it to be too harsh on the upside part that gets closest to the brow bone, I've added that same tone there to blend it out to where it seems a little bit more seamless. Again, I apologize, a lot of my photos be more on the dramatic end of the spectrum, but it does do a good job of illustrating the different colors and how to use them. Now, one of the biggest things that's going to be very important, I say this to everyone I've ever taught to, I've used it for every client I've ever done makeup on, is eyeshadow primer. As you can see in this picture, this is just a promotional material for Urban Decay showing their eyeshadow primer. But a lot of times, especially beginners, this was me in high school, going in and just putting eyeshadow straight onto my eye after I'd used moisturizer, after I'd put foundation on and everything else. And it would just end up creasing because my eyelids are really oily, or it would just look really patchy and bruisey. Especially when I'm trying to blend things out, it just would not work, and I would get so frustrated that I wanted to cry. Finding eyeshadow primer is literally night and day difference for me. Once I found it, I definitely fell in love with it. So, getting a smooth base is definitely probably one of the most important things that you're going to need to know when it comes to doing eyeshadow. So, typically you're going to use an eyeshadow primer, a liquid eyeshadow, or a thicker concealer, or a concealer that dries down all over the eyelid from the lashes all the way up to the brow bone, and laterally closer to where the hair actually grows a little bit too. So I always prefer to apply it further than I think I need it, to where I get that really beautiful, seamless, soft blend. And then when I go in and do the rest of my complexion, it looks really soft and natural. Another cool thing you can do too is if you want to do really colorful looks, or if you feel like the eyeshadow quality is not the greatest with what you have. Unfortunately, a lot of really colorful, like bright colors tend to not be very pigmented when you actually put them on your skin. In order to actually make them pop, you can actually use a white base as an eyeshadow primer instead. P. Louise makes a really great one that I love, especially for when I'm doing special effects like crazy eyeshadow makeup, to really make the colors pop. So you would apply that pretty much everywhere you're going to put eyeshadow, or specifically in the areas where you want to apply the more pigmented or bright colors to make them pop. You can also do this with pure black as well, especially when it comes to jewel tones or like multi-chromatic eyeshadow, anything really shimmery or has a little bit more of that depth to it. So these are some pictures of myself. This first picture, to get this really cool prismatic jewel tone here, I actually did a black base So all of this has a black base. And then I used my second to last finger, actually my ring finger, to kind of stamp this shimmer shade on top of the black. And then I used a brush to blend it into that pink color for Valentine's Day. Now this one and this one, sorry, again, I don't know how to chill sometimes, and I tend to flex with my eyeliner. I apologize. I don't expect you to be able to do that, especially as a beginner, so please do not be intimidated at all. I will show you how to do the basics. This is just examples of me using different bases. But to get these really, really, really pigmented, I actually used a white base all the way up to my eyebrow on both of these. And then that way, when I got to using all of my rainbow, like my bright rainbow colors, especially yellow and green, those tend not to show up very easily when you're just doing it on your skin. So when you do it over white, it pops really nicely. Next, in order to determine what your eye shape is, you also need to learn the anatomy of the eye. So you have two different types of eye anatomy. You're going to have vertical and horizontal. So vertical meaning up and down, obviously. So from the top here, you're going to have your brow bone, then your eye socket eyelid. So this is kind of like where your eye is right here. The top of your eyeball would end about right here. And then your crease, especially if you have hooded eyes, would end really low on the eye. So this area right here, especially if you have hooded eyes, can seem to all be one zone instead of having an extra line here. Here, obviously this is going to be your lash line, top and bottom, and then down here, your under eye crease or your under eye fat. Sometimes people actually accentuate this area to give more of a youthful or like a cutesy kind of appearance too. So these are going to be the common terms used wherever applying eyeshadow specifically. Vertical anatomy is going to be important in knowing where to place specific depths of colors to make the eyes wider, especially to open up the eye area. It's also crucial to ensuring that your eyeshadow is visible, especially if you have hooded or monolids. There's a couple of different techniques that you can use taking vertical eye anatomy into account. They're typically considered upper-lower structure techniques, where you basically take a gradient of colors transitioning from dark to light or light to dark, and you place them. Usually you're going to have a darker shade here, then your transition shade, and then your lightest shade or your base shade, and then a little bit of highlighter here and here, for example. That would be an example of an upper-lower structure technique. Next, you have horizontal eye anatomy. Now, this is going to be going from left to right instead of up and down on the eyes. This tends to be more common, I would say, in a lot of makeup tutorials that you see. So you have your inner corner here, your inner lid broken into thirds. So the first third is your inner lid. Then your middle lid, it's going to be the middle, outer lid, the outer third, and then your outer corner next to it. So this is going to be especially important for when you're trying to elongate the eye. Specifically for shadow placement in making wide set eyes appear closer together or in making closed set eyes appear further apart. These techniques tend to fall under the rainbow or the umbrella of left-right structure techniques, where you arrange the colors instead of up to down, you're arranging them from left to right in different intensities. For example, you'd be doing light to medium to dark. So you could do light on the inner lid, medium in the middle lid, and then dark on the outer lid. And that will kind of create an elongated, kind of foxy effect. You can do dark here, so the reverse of that, dark, medium, and light. And that will actually bring the eye closer to the other side. So if you have wide set eyes, it's going to make them seem closer together and balance your facial structure a little bit better. You can also do dark, blend like a medium, light, medium, and then dark. So where you have dark here and lighter in the middle, and that's going to give you a really cool halo effect. So if your eyes seem really flat and you want to add extra dimension to them, you have dark on the outside on both sides and then light in the middle, it'll create a really cool halo effect that's really gorgeous. So there are a couple of different eye shapes, and I pulled this up off the internet just to kind of show you a couple different examples on real people. I prefer to look at real people versus diagrams, to be honest. So monolid tends to be hard for you to determine where the crease actually is. Even from all the way to the brow bone, all the way to the lashes, sometimes it can be strong enough to where you almost have no definition in between. Some people like to either emphasize that or to balance the facial features, they kind of add almost like an artificial depth here, kind of balance the facial features. Double lids, those are going to be eyes that have a fold above the lash line that is visible even when your eyes are open. So typically, hooded eyes are going to be kind of almost the opposite of this, to where the crease is going to be a little bit more difficult to see. So the lid and the crease are not visible when the eyes are open. So you might see a little bit here, but the brow bone and then this kind of section of skin right where the brow bone is tends to droop on top of it, making whatever you've put on the lid a little bit harder to see. Almond eyes, this is when the outer corners and the inner corners are approximately aligned with one another. So where the eye ends here and where the eye ends here, it's the same. Now, they've done her makeup in a way that lifts it up more, but her eyes, technically, if you were to analyze them, they are very symmetrical. The end and the front end on the same part. Upturned eyes is when your eye on the inner side, your inner eye, is going to be lower than the outer part. So it's almost a diagonal line. Downturned, this is going to be more of like that puppy dog kind of eyes. Unfortunately, this picture doesn't really do it justice, but this part is going to be higher than the outer part. Deep set eyes, this tends to be something I notice very frequently, especially in a lot of trans femmes, especially because the brow bone is going to protrude a little bit further if you were assigned male at birth and you went through puberty. This area tends to develop secondary sex characteristics to where it is more prominent, which even if your eyes wouldn't have naturally been deep set if that hadn't occurred, it kind of artificially creates like a deep set effect. So a lot of people who are more on the trans feminine side tend to have to do makeup in a way that either emphasizes or detracts from the deep set of the eye. So eye sockets or eyeballs are set back in the sockets. The opposite of that is protruding eyes, and you can see that her eyes are coming forward so much that it actually creates a line underneath the eye area because the eyeballs are more forward in the socket. And you often see that on the upper area as well. Close set and wide set eyes, I kind of already brought this up, but the distance between her eyes here is smaller than one eye's length for her. So her eyes are closer together. So to do her makeup, she'd probably want to add more shadow over here to make her eyes seem further apart. Her eyes are going to be a little bit more wide set, meaning the distance between here and here is wider than the length of her eyes. So she could actually get away with adding more definition in this area to make them seem closer together if she wanted to. This is a different visualization. So again, close set eyes, you'd probably want to use this technique, specifically having a lighter shade, middle shade, and darker shade here. Wide set eyes, the darker shade's going to actually be the reverse of that. Now, wide set eyes, I find that for my trans mask, this tends to work really well to actually, if you exaggerate it all the way up to the eyebrow bone and add a matte or almost like a concealer shade that's slightly brighter underneath and around the eyebrow bone area, can actually make the eye area seem more masculine. Especially when I'm doing like drag king makeup, I tend to really exaggerate this area in here. It also makes the nose seem more prominent as well. However, if you're trying to feminize, do a very light version of this. Monolid eyes, you're going to start with having the area right here accentuated the most with the most darkness, and then blending it upwards. So this is going to be that vertical versus horizontal. So horizontal, horizontal, vertical, vertical. So hooded eyes, this is very common. Doesn't matter your ethnicity, honestly. A lot of people are, whether you're white, black, or Asian, tend to have hooded eyes. And unfortunately, a lot of the internet doesn't really cater to it because a lot of people who, I'm not quite sure why, but a lot of people who are popular on YouTube or in the beauty industry tend to not have hooded eyes. Not to say that there aren't people who do, but this tends to be underserviced, in my opinion, in the beauty world. So we're going to definitely focus on hooded eye application as well. So typically when you have hooded eyes, you don't want to apply dark shadow all over the lid. Not to say that you can't. I actually have a picture of a client that I did that to for a really cool smoky eye effect that makes her eyes look bigger. But typically you want to stay away from dark shadows except for on the outer edges and sometimes a tiny bit where you're creating like a false crease if that's what you're wanting to do. You're also going to use highlights in specific areas to make your eyes seem more open and wider as well. Different example. So if you're not wide set or close set, this is an example of where you would apply. So lighter shade typically here, and the blue is going to be the darker shade. Wide set eyes again, emphasis right here in the front of the eye instead of on the back end of the eye. Hooded eyes, a lot of times people are going to add this blue line right here is going to be an artificial crease. And in this case, the pink would actually almost be like a highlight effect. Deep set eyes, typically you're going to want to stay away from your eyeshadow being too dark if your eyes are deep set. So tend to stay away from the darker colors. You're going to want to brighten that area because lighter colors are going to be bringing things forward. Darker colors are going to be bringing things back. They're going to be receding from the viewer. So if you've ever taken an art class, anything that is light is going to be a highlight. Anything that's dark is going to be a shadow. Though the highlight is what's closest to you, the shadow is what's furthest away from you. So to fake that out for deeper eyes, in order to create the illusion that they're more forward and they aren't as deep set in the eye, you're going to typically want to stay more towards lighter colors. Now, especially if you have a more pronounced brow bone, you're going to want to stay away from this area in the front end being too dark because it can actually emphasize that brow bone a little bit, and you don't want that if your brow bone gives you dysphoria, for example. Single eyelids, this is just a fancy way of saying like monolids. When your eye is open, you can't see the crease at all. This is an example of creating depth to the eye area in a more flattering way. So this is a model that I did makeup on. Again, it's editorial makeup, so it is a little more dramatic, but her eyes were very wide set. She has very big, like cartoon eyes. So what I've done is I've done a dark eyeshadow actually in the crease with some really cool elements over here, and then a bright shade here, and then a softer blended shade in the outside to where her eyes are a little closer together from here to here, but artificially. I've only done that with eyeshadow to where her eyes don't seem too far apart. So here's an example of one of the vertical techniques. So your darkest shade typically is going to be applied here, your transition shade here, and then your base or highlighter shade up here. And then usually to make it seem like you're more awake, more bright, more engaged, you'll add a little bit of highlighter in the tear duct region as well. Now, this is that halo technique I was talking about. So if your eyes seem really flat, I find that this technique works really well on hooded eyes especially. You add depth to both ends of the eye and blend it out. You can actually elongate it to where it kind of meets up with the end of your eyebrow almost, to elongate the eye area as well if you like. And then by adding this bright pop of color in the middle, it adds more dimension to the eye area. So this is an example of a hooded eye before and after applying depth to the outer areas, and then a brighter color in the middle. So if you wanted to change the shape of your eye, so if you have more of a droopy eye shape, you're going to want to artificially heighten this area. So instead of doing your makeup to where it ends down here, you're actually going to end it on a higher note, almost like an winged eyeliner, to bring it up. And then sometimes you can even add a little bit of eyeliner in the corner to make the eyelid seem a little bit lower and really give you that siren eye or that fox eye kind of effect. Now, if your eyes are already kind of in a dramatic state and you don't want them to be even more dramatic, you want to be a little bit more demure, you can do a round eye shape. And that's actually a little bit easier than doing elongated. A lot of times you can actually start by doing round, and then if you feel like it's not giving you enough oomph, you can actually kind of wing things out and then add eyeshadow up a little bit higher on the outside to make it seem more lifted if you wanted to. But round is definitely a classic. You'll see that a lot, and a lot more, like when you see people on television, they tend to be a little bit more rounded. It's a little bit more natural looking than the elongated effect. This is going to be a little bit more like sultry. This is the horizontal gradient. This tends to be my favorite for pretty much any eye shape. I like doing this on hooded eyes too. Typically, this front area is going to be highlighted. Middle shade is going to be a transition color or a shimmer color. And then the outer corner tends to be the darkest shade. Now, the only eye shape I tend to not do this on is going to be wide spaced eyes, because normally you're going to have a little bit of depth here. So this is a model I did this technique on. She's Japanese and she has very hooded eyes. But I've done light here. The way the light is hitting it, this area is popping even more. And then this blue to black gradient on the outer edges. So even when her eyes are fully open, you see this really cool gradient effect that lifts her eye area and it elongates it as well. This is another example of how to do it for deep set eyes. Again, this is probably going to apply to a lot of folks who are having dysphoria, especially around the brow bone region. It's going to do, like, basically minimize it. I do find that if you have very big, heavy brows, I do highly recommend you shaping them to where they are higher, to where your mid-face is elongated. So mid-face meaning the distance between the eyebrows and the top of your forehead, and from your eyebrows to your eye area, and from your eye area to where your nose is, and from your nose to the philtrum, from the tops of your lips, basically, and to your chin. Those facial proportions are, strangely enough, pretty universal around the world, regardless of your culture, with the perception of beauty and symmetry. Typically, symmetry is associated with beauty, so by having those proportions more balanced out, they tend to be more, or perceived as more interesting or more engaging to look at. So by creating an eyebrow that is lifted higher up, this tends to open up the eye area, especially if you have deep set eyes or a heavier brow bone. And it also gives you more space to work around your eye area as well. So typically, this inner corner area and the top of the brow bone are going to be the lightest. Now, if you do have a heavier brow bone, I wouldn't take this any further than the midline of the eye. I wouldn't extend that highlight all the way here, because it can make the brow bone still seem more emphasized, because again, light is closer. It means it's coming towards you. Dark means it's receding and it's further away from you. So if you had a heavier brow bone, I'd actually take this transition color almost into the eyebrow area to where it seems like only this area is protruding. Again, darkest color on the outside area. This is an example of me doing that on my sister for her wedding. So You have the brighter colors here, a nice soft transition color all the way across. We both have bigger brow bones. I know it's hard to see in this picture, and also because I already contoured her eyes to make it more minimal. But you'll notice that the highlight area is only really right here. The rest kind of goes into her eyebrow, and then it's lifted out here on the side. There are a couple of different techniques as well for doing eyeshadow, or different styles. So smoky eye is definitely a classic, especially in the 80s and 90s, and then in modern times as well. So an easy way to do a smoky eye is to actually do your transition colors first to prevent it from getting muddy. Because if you do just the black first and then you blend a transition color on the outside of it, it might pick up a little bit of that darker pigment and swirl it into the transition color and make it look really muddy and not like what we want. It's going to look a little bit unkempt, which is not the vibe. So you want to use a transition color all around the eye area and then gradually add the darker color or even a shimmer to it from there. This was another model, again, editorial makeup, I apologize. She had very hooded eyes. Actually, depending on how she posed, she actually had a monolid. But you can see right here and here is where her crease actually would be. Now, if I had stopped there with her eyes open, you wouldn't have seen any of the eyeshadow I did on her, in spite of the fact that it was that dramatic. So, when her eye is open, I actually extended the color up higher. And you can really see that because I did a graphic liner there on top of the smoky eye. So instead of it barely showing her eyelid at all, I extended it that much higher, but not all the way to her eyebrow, in order to create like a really pretty smoky effect. Now, her eye shape as well, she actually had droopier eyes. So this is actually lower than this in real life. In the picture, you can't really see it though, because I actually, instead of bringing down the eyeshadow down here, you can kind of see where the anatomy would have wanted it to go down here. I actually lifted it upwards to where it's actually going a lot higher up, to where it gives her more of a sultry, like fox eye or siren eye kind of vibe instead. Another popular technique is the cut crease. This was definitely popularized by drag artists for sure, for maximum contrast on stage. You definitely want it to pop and be noticeable. But I love cut creases, especially for hooded eyes, to where you get that maximum impact. And it really honestly creates, like, it's almost impossible to tell that your crease isn't actually supposed to be there. Like, even on this model, her eye crease is actually closer to right here. You can kind of see in the shading right here. But she has artificially enhanced her crease to be higher up and make her eyes look bigger and more cutesy by being up here instead. And this also works really well on monolids as well. So here's a couple crazy pictures of me again. These are cut creases. So you can actually see in this one, my crease is actually only right here, but I've extended it all the way up here to make this eye area seem a lot bigger and a lot more symmetrical. Same with on this side. This is my girlfriend. So again, trying not to emphasize the brow bone too much because this was before she had FFS. So only highlighting here and not over here. And the cut crease inside here is brightening this whole area. Her eyes are very, very, very hooded. This whole area right here, I've done over. It's almost a little bit too dramatic because I've lifted the eye area up higher. Otherwise, you would have only been able to see just this area and it would have seemed very closed off and made her eyes seem very small. So by doing a cut crease, I've artificially extended this whole area and made it a lot more sultry, a lot bigger, a lot more feminine. Another technique that's really popular is Douyin eyeshadow. I apologize if I said that incorrectly. I am not fluent in Chinese, I'm afraid. But this technique is popularized by basically the Chinese version of TikTok. That's what Douyin is. And some of the characteristics of it are like shimmers, everything seems really blurred or blended. Usually it's a very soft wing, very delicate or even downturned sometimes. And they tend to accentuate or draw a crease under the eye area to create this area right here, this fat pad right here, which is often associated with being more youthful, more cutesy. And it's just really cute. And sometimes you'll even see that in cosplayers a lot as well, because a lot of anime characters tend to have those kind of characteristics as well. So that is it for my PowerPoint. Let me switch to my camera. All right. By the way, I can see if you have any questions now, by the way. I'm sorry I couldn't really answer them while I was doing the PowerPoint, but please ask me questions. Camera frozen. Sorry, let me reset that. There we go. Well, thank you for the PowerPoint compliments. I made that this morning. Sorry, I know it didn't. I go through a lot of different things on there, but um, it should be everything that I'm teaching right now. We're gonna actually have a copy of it, and we're gonna upload it to our YouTube channel. Same with my trans femme makeup and my trans mask makeup, and then my intro to foundation class. So that will also be happening with this class so that you're able to get through them again. If you want, I can even save my PowerPoint and PM it to you as well if you want to go through it too. Does it go before or after the eyeliner? So eyeshadow, I typically apply before eyeliner. Um, for more editorial looks, sometimes you actually use eyeliner as like your sketch before you're done doing it, but 9 times out of 10, you're gonna do eyeshadow first. So what does editorial mean? Editorial is like a fancy way of saying like high fashion or like weird fashion, alternative fashion, to where it's outside of the box, out of the box, out of the normal realm of doing cosmetics. So really bright and loud, or sometimes it can be as simple as doing a really cool graphic eyeliner. Graphic just meaning it's very sketched on, like some of those other images that you have of me with the really crazy eyeliner. Most people aren't going to be doing that, but it does do a good job of illustrating to you, like in some of the photos, for example, the importance of me using a white base to get the colors around all of that eyeshadow to really pop, for you to actually see the green or the rainbow color for that pride look I did. Cool. Yeah. For anyone who wants the PowerPoint copy, just DM me and I'll send it to you. But it should also be in the video when we upload it too. So I wanted to go over a couple other things, because one thing that I did not mention in the PowerPoint is different types of brushes and how to use them. So I'll show you a couple of different tools and when they are necessary. So for blending or applying like transition shades, like in this area, for example, I tend to use a bigger, fluffier brush. These are also great for just throwing on a base all over the lid real fast. A narrower, skinnier version is going to be easier to be more precise in this area. Now, a common mistake that a lot of beginners make is they actually overblend and it can make it look like a black eye or really muddy. You're like, why isn't my color showing? It's because you blended them into each other too much. And that's why transition shades are very important. So one way that you could apply eyeshadow, for example, instead of just doing the base all over, the darker shade down here, and then the transition shade, or doing all light and then transition shade and then the darkest shade, is picking the colors that you want to use, the most bright color first and then the most extreme color next, and blending them together with a transition shade to where you don't overblend it. So I typically don't do it that way because I've been doing makeup for so long that I already know exactly when to stop blending. But when you're a beginner, I do recommend using that way. Another brush that is going to be very important as well is a dense brush. Sorry, don't know if I can get this to focus. Sorry, I have it in manual mode. It's the only way I can get the lighting just right, but it's very skinny, still a tiny bit fluffy, but it's rounded, not round like a round brush is. It's almost kind of like a paintbrush. So these ones are not going to be very good at blending out in a wider area, so blending everything out like all the way up here and stuff. These ones are going to be really good for putting on that crease color if you want a very precise, thinner line, and then using the smaller of the fluffy brushes to blend it up and out. You can also use this to apply shimmery shades, for example. Personally, though, I actually really like using my fingertips to use the shimmeriest shades. I was wondering when one should lift your pen rather than making a longer line that connects or follows a natural flow to another graphic. So typically when you're doing graphic eyeliner or graphic eyeshadow, you follow the shape of the eye. My eye shape, I have wider set eyes because this distance is longer than the length of my eye. And I have more almond shaped eyes in that the distance or the furthest point inwards, more medial, is the same height as the outer point is, the more lateral end. So I tend to do my eyeshadow in a way that lifts things up more. So where you see the natural shadow of my eye, this fattier part with where my brow bone is, this area actually droops and hangs down out here. So when I do eyeliner, I actually make sure that I have almost a line like right there. So from the bottom lash upwards instead of being down here to where it's lifted. And then if I were to do a graphic liner, because my eyes are slightly hooded, I actually have two creases. I don't know if you can see that. So I actually kind of have two creases, one here and then one a little bit higher up. So when I do a graphic eyeliner, or if you have hooded eyes, I always recommend doing your eyeshadow with your eyes open instead of closing them and then just putting it on the lid. So I'm going to show you right now, actually. So let me put on my eyeshadow primer because I don't want this to be sliding all around my face. And again, I'm blending this out further than I think I need to where I can get a really nice blend going. So, what most people do or make the mistake of doing, I'll just do this as a quick example here. I'm just taking a base color. So only apply it where the lid is. So a lot of people just only apply it right there. And like you can barely tell, right? Like you can barely tell at all where I put that. So that's a huge mistake a lot of people make. And it often makes your eyes seem really closed off and smaller, which is almost counterintuitive to what you want. So if you have hooded eyes or heavier eyes like me, you would actually do it with your eyes open to where you know exactly how much is visible. Now I can close my eyes to where it blends into what I already applied, but and then using that fluffy brush, I can just blend it in little circles upwards. And because I've used an eyeshadow primer, I don't have to worry about little patchy messes here because my eyes are really dry today, surprisingly. But the eyeshadow primer has fixed that to where you can't see all the patches or the dry skin. And notice how that already widens and uplifts my face. Another brush that's really important too is having a really skinny, tiny, fluffy brush that you can use to go under your eye area. If you want to make them seem even bigger. So this whole area has been drawn upwards and more lifted. So that way you don't have it just only right here. Let me do the other side to where you can see the before and after. See how much tinier this eye looks? And literally all I did was just, the only difference I did was just applying my eyeshadow with my eye open. Now I'm going to find a transition shade to where you can kind of see how I would add depth to the eye area. So I used this color on the lid and I'm using this color as a transition color. I have a more neutral skin tone, so I'm able to kind of, if you have a neutral skin tone, you can kind of pull off a lot of different colors. Um, Eyeshadow palettes that tend to be more monochromatic are really nice. But I do find that people tend to make the mistake, especially starting out, of seeing an eyeshadow palette and wanting to use all of the colors, and it tends to look a little bit muddy. So I'm going to show you. So I did this as my base color everywhere. Now this is where I'm going to apply that transition color, especially for hooded eyes. I'm going to do it for hooded eyes specifically, okay? So outer third of the eye here. So dividing the eye into thirds. Nothing too crazy. Now notice this is the fallout I'm talking about. So this is why I do my eyes before I ever even put foundation and everything else on. It's where it's really easy to just You can make mistakes, but it's not really a mistake because you're just going to clean it up afterwards anyway. And then I blend that into the crease. You can kind of make a V shape if you want to with it as well. So kind of like a V, with most of it being concentrated on the outer third. And notice how I am blending it almost in like like a U shape up into that really pretty transition shade. And then you can take the other brush, and even though I didn't add anything to the brush, all I've done is blend it out where I don't have anything harsh. And then from there, you can even take these kind of brushes or the denser, skinnier brushes and go into the darkest shade, the deepening shade, and run that along the lash line area and bring you in. And sometimes, especially if you do this with like a really dark brown or a black shade, you can get away without even wearing eyeliner. And I can sometimes enhance that V a little bit more as well. Using a swiping motion blends it, but if you use a tapping motion, it'll actually pack it and make the color more intense. So trust the process. It looks a little crazy right now, but once I get my little makeup wipe, it'll look a lot nicer. Now I'm going to take one of those highlight shades, and I mentioned I like to actually use my finger. So I like to just kind of press it on there and then swipe. And then if you want this area to be a little bit more noticeable, you can add a tiny bit down there too. I'm actually going to grab a really tiny fluffy brush like this one and dip it into a highlighter color and apply that just right here underneath the eyebrow bone. So that way it has that multi-dimensionality. And I might add a tiny bit right here just on the inner corner to make it seem like I've actually had my coffee today. And then I'll take my makeup wipe, get rid of the fallout. You can actually do a really harsh line if you want. And this is a really cool beginner way to know where you want to put your eyeliner at. When you're looking head on, you're like, I don't really like that eye shape. Maybe I want to bring it in a little bit more. So that's like a really cool hack if you have a hard time finding where you want to put your liquid eyeliner, is you can literally just use a makeup wipe and wipe your eyeshadow and you'll know exactly where to put it. Personally, though, I prefer a really smooth, blurred effect right here, but for the sake of showing you where eyeliner goes, I just wanted to show you a cool trick to make your life a little bit easier. But notice how it's not over blended. You have a really pretty shimmer shade here, that transition or base color here into the transition shade, and then it's the darkest only right here in this little almost V shape. Whereas this side is just only the base color and it's only going over the lid. I can do a cut crease on this side if you guys want. So that's usually when I would take my eyeliner and pop it right in the lashes, right on the lash line. Sorry if I look like I'm getting exercised right now. Now, if you have hooded eyes, you actually don't want your eyeliner to be too thick because a lot of times it can almost create the effect that you have a monolid because this whole area, if I did really thick eyeliner, it would just only look, and then I had a wing here, for example, pretend the line of my crease is the end of my eyeliner, and then I had it wing up. It would look fine, but it would not give the multidimensionality that I want. So keep your eyeliner thinner. A cool thing you can do, especially if eyeliner is challenging for you, is apply it super messy like this. See how messy that is? But while it's still wet, I can actually take the heat from my fingers and just blend it back and forth, back and forth. And now I'm starting to get a really smoky effect. Now, if I want to really emphasize, he doesn't like to focus when I'm this close. Sometimes, if you want to close this area off a little bit, no, if I wanted to, I could just take a complexion sponge and blend this area in a more reverse C shape if I wanted to keep my eyes round. This would be how I would keep my eyes round. But if I wanted to make them even more dramatic and more elongated, a tiny bit of a wing there. And a cool thing you can do is just lightly swipe it up. Sorry, I know she doesn't like to focus. And if you really wanted to, you can take a liquid eyeliner. And since I have these epicanthal folds here, you see where, sorry, let me shade. You see where this almost C-shaped area is here? A lot of people tend to have it come down and out like this instead of having that fold there. So if I want to artificially erase that line, I can actually draw a little line right here and it'll make my tear duct look a lot more slanted and create the illusion that my eye is this shaped instead of this shaped. So that is how you would get that kind of siren eye effect. So on this side, if we wanted to do a cut crease, so especially if you have hooded eyes or monolids, this is very helpful. I'll do the same exact eyeshadow colors. So I'm gonna do that crease again. With my eyes open, looking into the mirror, I'm doing the blending to where you can still see the eyeshadow and it's not just hiding in my lid. Sometimes I'll do little windshield wiper motions, but if I want it to fan out, I do little upward circles. Now, if you want your cut crease to be even more dramatic, you can actually add a little bit more color here to where you get maximum impact of that cut crease. Again, this is going to be one of those trust the process kind of things. Now, if you find that you have really watery eyes, you can do what I just did, is I actually kept my eye completely closed, and I just used this skinny blending brush to go literally through my lashes on the upper and bottom to where I don't have to worry about getting up close here and then my eyes watering and hates me because I have too much powder flying around. I use that same transition color, but I'm going to make it a little more dramatic by dragging it all the way in here. I'm just flicking it up in the end, going back to that original shade and softening it without adding any color to the brush. And do people do a cut crease on the lower lid to get the eye fat there? Yes, technically. So if somebody wanted to emphasize the under eye fat area, they could add a little bit of a line here. And from there, after you've blended it out, and actually take a teeny tiny brush, a little bit of a shimmer color, and pop that in there. If you wanted to be extra dramatic, you can use more like that, but that's just extra dramatic. But that way you have almost like this cutesy little like, sorry, it looks weird with the context of the other side. But that way you have that kind of cutesy area where it seems like you have a little bit of like a fat pad right underneath your eye. Now, a lot of people will emphasize that even more by drawing this area down. So I could actually draw little lashes here. And notice how this is sagging lower now. I'm back to, instead of having that lift, I'm back to having that symmetry back and then that cute little fat pad right there. I have better colors to do that with, but I was just using the eyeshadow that's in front of me. Normally, they tend not to have like a smoky winged eyeliner. It tends to actually be a really precise um, liner. So more like a skinny liner instead of it fanned out like that. So back to the side we're going to do a cut crease on. Sorry, I have issues with the camera focusing. And then I'm using the brush for that transition color again, just to blend it out a little bit more again. And because I want even more contrast, I'm going to go into one more shade just to darken this part out here. And I'm just doing a kind of a V shape. And then for the actual cut crease part, let me clean this up first. I'm not going to do the highlight part yet because after I do the cut crease, I want to add a little highlight right here too. And then I'll do that to the brow bone. But normally to cut a crease, I'll use a thicker concealer or the eyeshadow primer, especially if the eyeshadow primer has a tint to it. And what you can do is you can just dab that right on there and look up, and it'll transfer up a little bit. And from there, I usually take a rounded kind of concealer brush. This is really flat, like a paintbrush. And from there, I will apply this everywhere I want that cut crease to be. And then I'll hold my eye open. Because I want to make sure you can see it. And then I'll blend this in. I'm just pressing it in to where it's not super patchy or anything. I'm gonna add a tiny bit more concealer because I actually, for the sake of this video, want to dramatize it a little bit more and raise my eyelid even higher. So now you should be able to really see that. And then I like to just use my fingers to blend out this concealer specifically because it does really nicely. So notice how I've created an artificial lid area. And then from there, while that's a little bit tacky still, I'd actually go right in with my finger or with a more precise eyeshadow brush and stamp that really pretty color in. I know I have that really pretty pink orange multi-chrome effect here. Cut creases, by the way, they don't have to be just a bright color. They can be an actual darkest color, almost like a graphic smoky eye. And then to keep this blended out, I'm using that same transition shade and going back and forth over here. And then I want to do a little bit of highlight on the upper brow area to where it looks even more blended. Again, I've overdrawn my eyebrows to where you can really see how, like in a really more dramatic eye shape. If I had wanted to do more normal features, my eyebrows probably would have ended here and been down lower here. But it's the same concept. I've just drawn my eyes a lot wider to where you can really see all the different layers of it. And then I could even add a little bit more again right here. And then from there, I would just do some eyeliner. Given the shape of a cut crease, I tend to like to do an eyeliner wing. And you typically want that wing to have the same curve as that, but down here, where it really looks symmetrical. If you guys want, we can do a whole video on just eyeliner even. That could be pretty cool too, especially because there's so many different ways you can do eyeliner for different eye shapes, very similar to the way you do it for eyeshadow. But this is just a smoky wing using lightest shade in here, medium shade in here, and then this outer area is the darkest shade. Again, if I wanted to make my wider eyes a little closer together, this helps, but I could also do shadow here and then leave it bright out there like I did for my model. Is it good to step back really far sometimes to see it from a further perspective? I would say yes. So by me moving my camera back here, I can really tell, oh wow, this one looks super lifted and pretty, but I have this cute little pouch right here. You still have that lid definition, and it's emphasizing the lift of the eyebrow as well. This side, I notice I can still see the cut crease even with my eyes open like this, which is exactly what I wanted, because I want to be able to see it with my eyes open, not just when my eyes are closed. But if I were to look down this way, you probably wouldn't be able to see it. Now for this side as well, since I did an artificial cut crease, I could actually get away with doing thicker eyeliner, whereas on this side I couldn't. So if I wanted to do really thick eyeliner on this side, like do a really nice dramatic cat eye, I could get away with that because I've artificially heightened where my crease is at. So I've basically created a fake crease where I didn't have one. And I like using a beauty sponge with maybe a tiny bit of product on it to where you can just easily blend out the edges if you want it to be softer. Again, I've artificially created my eyes to be way larger just by virtue of redrawing my eyebrows on a lot higher than they naturally grow to where I have a lot more lid space. It comes back down to the proportions again. So I have quite a large forehead. So the difference in height between here and here, if my eyebrows were a lot lower, it would seem a lot droopier and my facial proportions would not seem as balanced. But by drawing them up higher here and doing the makeup the way I did, it elongates and makes this area seem a lot wider. Same with me overlining my lips when I obviously haven't done my lips, but I would overline my lips to make the distance between my nose and my philtrum at the top of my lips a little thinner, where my lip is more up here, to where the size of my lips is the same. So my upper lip is a little smaller than my lower lip, but by creating that symmetry, it's a lot more aesthetically pleasing across pretty much most cultures, excuse me. It tends to be more feminizing. So if you are trying to be a little bit more masculine in the way you're doing your makeup, I would actually lower your lip to where there's more distance here between your nose and your philtrum, because that tends to be perceived as more masculine. Same with cheekbones. Obviously, this line from the top of my ear to the corner of my mouth is going to be where my cheekbone naturally rests. Sometimes people artificially make them go higher up or even lower them down, depending on their face shape as well. And we can do an entire class on contouring as well, to where you know how to contour for your face shape the same way that we learned how to essentially contour your eyes for your eye shape. Yeah, honestly, everything makeup, all of it, even eyeliner, eyebrows, everything, a lot of it really comes down to just using light and shadow. And that's essential to contouring. So pretty much everything is contouring. Whether you're doing lipstick, you're contouring your lips, putting on your complexion, you're contouring your complexion, your cheekbones, your chin, your jawline, your forehead, doing your eyebrows. A lot of times you'll have like a gradient to where you're contouring to where this area is darker and this area is lighter, especially when you're doing drag. It'll tend to be darker out here, almost cartoonish. Um, all makeup is really just art and experimenting with how you want to look. And once you finally get into your niche, once you find something that you really are obsessed with doing and you're like, this is me, having your own aesthetic is definitely one of the fun aspects of it. Like you can link the different graphic edges into each other. Yes. Um, it's kind of like when you look at a sculpture, but a geometric sculpture, a lot of different planes. Like I don't know if you've seen Arcane, But that animation style, it's a very geometrical shading, and a lot of this eye area tends to be really dramatic in the way that it is geometrically organized. And so the eyes are actually really engaging. They're the first thing you're going to look at in their animation because of how almost box-like but still blended it is. And you can do that with makeup as well. So whether it's blending the way your contour is into here, a lot of times blending, you're going to have like a 3 shape. So I'll have contour here, blending it into my eyeshadow, then down my jawline, or excuse me, down my cheekbone and then down my jawline. So like a 3 shape. And that will make this eyeshadow actually blend into my contour and it'll look a lot more natural. Body art is definitely niche contouring because you're actually contouring all of the body. Actually, for my Lady Dimitrescu cosplay, I actually did massive contouring for the chest area because I'm a little deficient in that department and I wanted to create artificial and so I contoured that entire area with shade and light. So anywhere that's going to be darker, it's going to be further away, and then anything that's brighter, so the highlight in the areas that I want to come forwards,